One person knew when I would be home. Another person knew exactly where I would stand. I didn't know either of them. I never saw either person clearly, and yet both of them left up to something behind. Something that made it impossible for me to believe they were just random strangers. The first story happened in 2023. I was living alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Indianapolis. I worked overnight shifts, so my routine was pretty predictable. I left home around the same time every evening and came back around the same time every morning. At the time, I didn't think that made me vulnerable. Then I started noticing the house across the street. I still don't know how the people in that house knew when I was home. My name is Ryan Callahan. I'm 31. Back in 2023, I was living alone in a quiet neighborhood outside Indianapolis, Indiana. I worked as an overnight IT technician for a medical company, so my schedule was pretty predictable. I usually left around 6:30 in the evening and got home a little after 7 in the morning. The house directly across from mine, 1847 Willow Creek Drive, had been empty for almost 2 years. It was a small 2-story house with faded green siding and an overgrown front yard. The previous owner had died, and from what I heard, nobody in the family wanted the house. The windows were covered from the inside, and there was a sheet of plywood over the back door. I barely paid attention to it. That changed one Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my car in the driveway after work when I noticed the front door across the street was open. Not wide open, just a few inches. I remember thinking it was strange because I'd never seen it open before. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds. Then I went inside. The next morning it was closed. I figured someone had finally started cleaning the place out. About a week later, I noticed a silver SUV parked in front of the house. It wasn't there every day. Usually it showed up sometime after midnight and was gone before I woke up. At first I figured it belonged to a contractor. Then I noticed something. The SUV was always parked with the driver's side facing my house. I didn't think much of it at first. Not until one morning when I came home and saw someone standing in the upstairs window. I couldn't see their face, just someone standing behind the glass. They weren't moving. I watched the window for a few seconds, then went inside. I told myself it was probably just a shadow. A few days later, I got home around 7:20 in the morning and found my trash can sitting at the end of my driveway. I normally kept it beside my garage. I figured the garbage company had moved it. Then I noticed the lid was open. Inside was an empty cardboard box I'd thrown away the night before. I'd flattened the box before I put it in there. Now it was sitting right on top. I didn't think much of it until I noticed something written on the side. My name. Just my first name. Ryan. I stared at it for a while. I hadn't written it there. I took a picture and threw the box away. That night at work, I checked my security camera app. I had one camera pointed at my driveway. There was no footage of anyone touching the trash can. But at 3:14 that morning, the camera had gone offline for about 11 minutes. That had never happened before. I replaced the camera the following weekend. After that, I started paying more attention to the house across the street. The SUV kept showing up. One morning I saw the upstairs curtains move. I called the non-emergency police line and told them what I'd been noticing. An officer came by that afternoon. He walked around the property but didn't find anyone. He told me the house was still vacant. Could just be kids getting inside he said. "Just keep your doors locked." I thanked him. For a few days, nothing happened. Then one morning I found a folded piece of paper under my windshield wiper. There was only one sentence on it. "You work nights, right?" I didn't touch it. I called the police again. This time I told them about the SUV, the house, and the note. An officer came out and took the paper. He asked if anyone knew my work schedule. I told him my coworkers did, obviously. He asked if I'd had any problems with anyone recently. I said no. Before he left, he told me to call right away if I saw anyone on my property. That night, I stayed at my sister's house. The next morning, I came home around 8. The silver SUV was parked across the street. For the first time, I saw someone sitting inside. A man. He was looking straight ahead. I pulled into my driveway. The man didn't move. I got out of my car. He slowly turned his head toward me. Then he drove away. I went inside and locked every door. That's when I noticed something that really bothered me. The back door of my house was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving. Always. Nothing appeared to be missing. But my kitchen drawer was open. The drawer where I kept my spare keys. I called the police immediately. They searched the house. Nothing. Then one of the officers asked me something. "Do you know what that house was used for before?" I said no. He looked at me for a second. Then he said, "You might want to stay somewhere else for a few days." I moved out that weekend. 2 months later, the city finally boarded up the house completely. I never saw the silver SUV again. I never found out who had been inside that house. I never found out how they knew my work schedule. And I never found out how someone got into my house without taking anything. But there's one thing I still think about. A few weeks after I moved, I went back to pick up some mail. As I was pulling away, I looked across the street. The upstairs window of the abandoned house was still boarded shut. But underneath the plywood, someone had scratched 4 numbers into the frame. They were the last 4 digits of my phone number. I still don't know who put them there. I still have the photograph on my phone. I don't know who took it. And I don't know how they knew my name. What still bothers me is that the picture was taken inside a house I'd never been in before that day. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 31. Back in October of 2024, I was working as a freelance real estate photographer in Columbus, Ohio. Most of my jobs were pretty routine. I'd get an address from a realtor, drive out there, take pictures of the property, and upload everything that evening. One Tuesday, a realtor named Rachel Bennett called me about an old house outside Lancaster. The house was at 1847 Willow Creek Road. She told me it had been sitting empty for almost 2 years. The previous owner had died, and the family had been arguing over what to do with the property. Rachel wanted exterior photos that afternoon. I remember asking her if the house was secure. She said, "As far as I know." I didn't think much of it at the time. When I got there, the house looked pretty much how I expected. It was 2 stories with a brick front, an overgrown yard, and dirty windows. There was a detached garage behind the house. The driveway was long enough that I couldn't see the road from the front door. I started taking pictures. While I was photographing the side of the house, I noticed that one of the upstairs curtains was open. That seemed strange because Rachel had told me nobody was living there. Then I noticed the front door wasn't completely shut. It was open maybe half an inch. I called Rachel. "Hey, did somebody come by before me?" "No, why?" "The front door's open." She paused, then she said, It probably doesn't latch. The house has been empty for a while. I pushed the door closed. It locked. I finished the exterior shots and left. The next morning, Rachel texted me. She wanted me to take interior photos too. She said she'd left a key inside the lockbox beside the front door. I drove back around 10:30. The key worked. Inside, the house smelled like dust and old carpet. There was still furniture everywhere, but most of it was covered with plastic. I started with the kitchen, then the living room, then the hallway. Everything seemed normal until I noticed footprints in the dust near the back door. They were clear enough that I could tell they were fairly recent. They weren't mine. They looked like work boots. The footprints came through the back door and went toward the stairs. Then they just stopped. I called Rachel. "There are footprints in here." She sounded surprised. "Are you sure they're not old?" "No, I mean, they're pretty clear." She thought for a second. Maybe the contractor went in. "Was there a contractor?" "Not recently." I didn't really know what to say. I almost left. But instead, I kept working. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. The first 2 were empty. The third had an old wooden desk beside the window. There was a computer monitor on it, but no computer. I took a few pictures of the room. Then I noticed something underneath the desk. A small black phone charger. It looked pretty new. I remember thinking someone had probably just forgotten it. I finished upstairs and went down to the basement. It was mostly empty. There was an old furnace, some boxes, and a locked wooden door at the far end. I took a few pictures and left. That night, Rachel called. She asked about the upstairs bedroom. "Did you photograph the desk?" "Yeah." "Can you send me that photo?" I sent it. A few minutes later, she called again. "Ethan, did you move anything?" "No." The desk was empty yesterday. I opened the photo. There was a small black object sitting beside the monitor. I zoomed in. It was an old flip phone. I didn't remember seeing it. Rachel told me not to go back until she figured out what was going on. I agreed. 3 days later, she called again. Someone had broken a basement window. Nothing seemed to be missing. She asked if I'd noticed anything else. I told her about the footprints. There was a long silence. Then she asked, "Did you photograph your car when you left?" "Probably. I usually do." I checked. There was one picture of my car sitting in the driveway. Behind it, partially hidden by the trees, was a dark SUV. I hadn't noticed it while I was there. Rachel asked if I knew who owned it. I didn't. She said she'd never seen it before. That evening, she went back to the property. When she got there, the SUV was gone. But there was something sitting on the front porch. A printed photograph. Rachel called me from the driveway. "Ethan, you're going to think this is weird." "What?" "There's a picture here." "Of what?" "The upstairs bedroom." I didn't say anything. She continued. "It's the same room you photographed." I asked her to send me a picture of it. She did. The photograph showed the bedroom from the doorway, the desk, the monitor, the window. It looked almost exactly like the picture I'd taken. Except for one thing. The photograph had been taken from inside the hallway. Someone had been standing right where I'd stood when I took my own picture. Rachel said there was writing on the back. She read it to me, to Ethan Parker. I asked if she'd given my name to anyone. She said no. I asked if my name was anywhere on the house paperwork. She said she didn't think so. Then she said something that bothered me even more. The picture has a date printed on it. What date? October 8th. I checked my phone. I'd been at the house on October 10th, 2 days later. I never went back. Rachel reported everything to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. There weren't any fingerprints we could connect to anyone. The SUV wasn't caught clearly enough on camera, and whoever left the photograph was already gone. A few weeks later, Rachel stopped working with the seller. I assumed that was the end of it. But about 6 months later, I was going through some old photos on my computer. I found the original picture of the upstairs bedroom. I zoomed in. The black phone was still sitting on the desk. But there was something else. In the reflection of the monitor, you could just barely see the hallway behind me. And near the doorway was a person. Not clearly enough to identify. Just a shoulder and part of a dark jacket. I had never noticed it before. I still don't know who that person was. I don't know why they were inside the house. I don't know how they got my name, and I don't know why someone would take a picture of that room 2 days before I arrived. The house was sold a few months later and completely renovated. I've never been back. But I still have that photograph. Every once in a while, I think about it. And there's one thing I still can't get past. If that picture really was taken 2 days before I arrived, why was the person in it standing exactly where I would later stand?